The National Pulse with Ashraf Garda. Weekdays, 3 to 6 p.m.
All right, we'll talk about Haiti just now, but let's get to Azerbaijan now, Baku in particular, for the UN Climate Change Conference. And, the acronym, COP29. I remember we had COP16 or 17 in Durban, about 10, 12 years ago, right? So let's find out what's happened there. It's been fascinating. The big issue is climate change and the impact it has on the world. And the other part of it is the big issue around nations, industrialized or not, and how they contribute to negative climate change and what more they need to be doing in terms of energy resources and not adopting any types of energy resources that actually harms the global climate. It's all very complex. Is it? I don't know. We'll find out. Thando Lukuko is the National Coordinator at the Climate Action Network South Africa. Thando, thanks for connecting to the National Pulse.
Thanks for having me, Ashraf. Good
Thank
to be
you.
with you.
Right, so of course, you are our eyes and ears at COP29. First of all, what's your general view in terms of some of the key takeouts there?
Generally, I think things are moving at a bit of a snail's pace, though, if I'm honest. There's three key conversation pieces, right? The first one is what's called Article 6, which speaks to things like carbon market. And carbon market is just the trading of carbon credits, or what you call, I don't know how to put it simply, but the pollution that's taken out of the atmosphere, you can trade some of that. So what are the rules around it? So that's one of the sticky issues. The second one, which is a rather major one, is on what's called NCQG, which is the getting of 1.5 trillion, 1.5 trillion US per annum, and how we might be able to get that. And then, of course, that speaks to us more directly, is the just transition conversation and some of the pathways for how we might be able to get there. So a lot of this stuff is still under some negotiation, but it is taking a bit of a while to kind of get us to a good landing zone.
Okay, so help those of us who don't fully understand what's happening. There's climate change, and we obviously see evidence of it. I mean, there's just so many examples of it, right? And there's been pressure on the economies and the countries of the world to say, hold it, you need to behave better, right? So who's doing what in terms of what are they being asked to do in terms of this, we need to behave better, and is that working?
Okay, the simplest way I could say it is countries that have typically made money off of burning of fossil fuels, so oil, gas, and coal, have been the biggest contributors to climate change, right? And so when you look at who that is, it's typically your global north countries, so your wealthier nations, G7 countries. And then it's largely affected more so the poorest nations and some of the poorer nations or developing nations of the world. So the idea is, can we then get those who are responsible to transfer money and technology and other resources from their countries to our countries so that we can be able to deal with the impacts of climate change? In real terms, that means if there is a flooding in Durban, as we know, or snow in Durban, as we know, and infrastructure is damaged, where's the money going to come from? Because we know the South African fiscus doesn't have the kind of balance sheet to fix all of those problems. And so the ones who are responsible for rather creating that problem need to contribute some funds and more funds than they have for us to be able to then rebuild many of our economies. And so that's basically the gist of what's trying to happen here. And so on all these other different streams, the key thing is the financing. So that's where this 1.5 trillion comes into effect. It's to some degree supposed to help us alleviate some of those problems and come up and pay for the solutions, essentially.
Okay, so is that demand working? Because, I can remember going back to the COP17 I alluded to in Durban. That was raised already at that time, and that's over a decade ago.
Yeah.
So is that working, keeping in mind some of the leading industrialized nations, in fact, are not signatories to the COP agreements, aren't they?
Yeah, the issue is the time. So it is working. It's moving very, very slowly, partly because you've got 190 something countries in the UN system that are trying to negotiate, right? And you can imagine it's a bit of a push and pull. Those who have the money don't want to take out more money. Those without the money are trying to get more money. And so that push and pull takes a while. And then obviously we're trying to talk about a legal instrument. And so the wording becomes key as well. And so you find that it takes a long time for us to generally agree on what wording that we will use that doesn't unduly impact one country over another, even though there's a very clear understanding of who's responsible and who's being impacted the most.
Okay. What about South Africa's role at COP29? What are our unique issues and what did South Africa put on the table?
So South Africa is in a very unique position, right? Because if you look at number one, the continent is generally responsible for about 3% of all of the global emissions. South Africa, though, is number 12 in the world at the last I checked, and we're number one on the continent in terms of pollution. So we hold a bit of a responsibility over most of our African colleagues, but less of a responsibility in terms of the global landscape. So what we try to do is to position ourselves in such a way that with our strength as a country, we then use it to push for greater ambition, for greater commitments from developing nations, towards the transfers towards so-called global south countries. So what South Africa has put in there is definitely the need for financial support to come from the global north to the global south, so that it helps us to be able to build what it is that we want to do, but equally would have a knock-on effect for other countries who are far more impacted than we are. You can think of your Malawis and other countries that are really, really struggling to have money to pay for things.
Okay, interesting, your initial point, you said things are moving at a snail's pace. So is climate change moving at a rate faster than at the snail's pace? And if that's the case, where are we heading as a continent? Not a continent, as a globe, yeah.
As a globe. So yes, it is. You've seen it, right? The kinds of changes that we're seeing happening in a place like KZN are really, really scaling up. And this is the challenge that we're trying to fight, is how can we get these countries to recognize the urgency, and then with that urgency to be able to act with a similar level of urgency. And that's really where the struggle is. It's not happening. So the very real risk that we're running is that by the time we get to something that's workable in terms of a solution, the damage would have been so extensive that the solution that we get to is outdated, and it constantly requiring more money. And so this is the snag that we're in. We're not doing enough at a fast enough pace to be able to really impact climate change impacts for communities, really, and people.
And is there one final point you wish to add in terms of maybe an elephant in the room that we're not aware of?
I guess the only way I could say it is that you probably won't be surprised to hear that it's typically the rich nations that are trying to block any which way where they would have to bear the responsibility for the damages, of course, to the rest of the globe. And what we need to do as a people is to ensure that they recognize that it's them who are responsible for this, and that they hold their responsibility to do more than what we need to do as a country and the global south to be able to fix the challenges that we have in terms of climate change.
Okay, well, there you are. Lots of challenges, lots of problems, lots of issues being put on the table. Is real change effective? We will certainly have to observe that. It's been ongoing for a long time. And at this point in time, yes, the globe, climate change is changing at a rate faster than the snail space as we speak about. Thando Lukuko, who's the National Coordinator and Director at the Climate Action Network of South Africa, much appreciate your time.